And between them, Ernest Martin, Cy Foyer and Frank Loesser made an impressive team of ambitious, smart, creative individuals, and they were certain their future lay on Broadway, with Cy Foyer later recalling, "Ernie was the spark plug and I was the engineer, and we pushed our way into the theatre with our elbows and teeth."
Just talking musicals with you.
Hello, I'm Lesley Anne Knight and welcome to Just Talking Musicals and the story behind my favourite musical of all time, Guys and Dolls. As the world greeted the dawn of another new year in January 1950, there was the most definite aura of hope in the air. This auspicious year marked the halfway point in the 20th century, a turning point in time and a propitious moment to leave not just the stark memories of a decade-long world depression behind, but also to rebuild physically and emotionally after the torrent of two devastating world wars whose shockwaves had touched the whole of humanity. This new decade, this turning point in the century, had an awful lot of good times to catch up on. Although optimism was in the air in Great Britain, with plans afoot for a great festival celebrating not just the arts, but science, technology and architecture, economic prosperity was still out of most people's grasp in 1950. The aftermath of World War II was still everywhere to be seen in major cities, with ever-present bomb sites, temporary prefab housing and a countryside littered with wartime military bases. But the dawn of a new half-century brought tangible hope of a brighter future for the country, with the emergence of a universal education system, social welfare, a national health service, and towns and cities modernised and reborn from out of the ashes of the forlorn bomb sites. Although America's post-war recovery had been much more straightforward than that of its European allies, they still had more than 12 million American men and women serving in the armed forces, 2/3 of whom were stationed abroad, and each and every one of them were keen to get home and back to a normal way of life as soon as possible. And thanks to one of the most significant pieces of legislation ever produced by the federal government, returning veterans soon found their rehabilitation back into the mainstream miraculously eased with the help from the so-called GI Bill. Famously offering low-interest mortgages, unemployment benefits for up to a year, and grants for tuition at college and trade schools, it quite literally got the returning war vets back up on their feet and back into the economy. And so, with the manufacturing and building industries in full flow, the economy was finally following suit after 2 long decades of hard times. And post-war America rose to the challenge of this newfound prosperity, with families moving out to the suburbs to newly built homes paid for by their low-interest mortgages and loans. Saturday matinees at the cinema were top of the list for the younger generation, along with favourite weekly radio variety shows. Television sets were the next big thing in America, with programmes like Ed Sullivan's weekly show, The Toast of the Town, broadcasting live on the CBS network from New York every Sunday evening, with the host becoming so popular they even renamed the show after him. It was around this time that a former employee of the CBS radio network had just had his first hit on Broadway. Ernest Martin had worked his way up through CBS from radio theatre usher right up to director of network programming. But in the late 1940s, he decided that radio's peak had passed, cast his eyes toward the theatre and went into partnership with a former trumpet-playing graduate of the Juilliard School of Music by the name of Cy Foyer, and together they formed Foyer and Martin Musicals, Inc. Cy Foyer had been appointed head of music at Republic Pictures in Hollywood when he was just 27 years old, and regularly found himself working with some of the top songwriters and composers on contract to the big studios. One such person was a keen and eager lyricist and composer by the name of Frank Loesser, and the new producing team of Foyer and Martin Musicals, Inc. wasted no time in hiring him for their first Broadway outing. It's been said that Frank Loesser was born 10 years too late to follow the classic working pattern of lyricists writing for Broadway in the 20s and being exiled by the Great Depression to work in Hollywood in the 30s, but he most definitely made an impact on both. It was during his time in Hollywood in the 1940s that he was destined to work with the prolific songwriter Hoagy Carmichael, who recalled first seeing him from an office window when he was working at Paramount. "Who's that little character swinging his coattails and whistling? I never saw anybody so self-assured. Watching Frank fascinated me. The very cockiness of the kid impressed me. I figured he had something. I was working without a collaborator at the time, so you can imagine my enthusiasm and delight when the head of the music department deposited Frank in my crib. All the time we worked together, Frank never violated the rules of construction or what it takes to make a hit song. It didn't take any time for me to know he'd justified the confidence I'd had when I first saw him strutting across the lot at Paramount. We had a lot of hits and a lot of laughs. And between them, Ernest Martin, Cy Foyer and Frank Loesser made an impressive team of ambitious, smart, creative individuals, and they were certain their future lay on Broadway, with Cy Foyer later recalling, "Ernie was the spark plug and I was the engineer, and we pushed our way into the theatre with our elbows and teeth." They had already struck lucky in 1948 with their first Broadway show, Where's Charlie?, based on the hit farce by Brandon Thomas, Charlie's Aunt. But if they were going to make their names as successful Broadway producers, they had to have a follow-up, and it had to be good. One day, Martin called up his partner from California and pronounced, "I am holding in my hand one of the greatest titles for a musical you've ever heard, called Guys and Dolls." The title Ernest Martin had just fallen for was an anthology of stories by newspaperman and writer Damon Runyon. Runyon was best known for his humorous short stories about gamblers, hustlers and gangsters set during the Prohibition era in New York, inhabited by characters from Brooklyn or the Midtown demi-monde, with colourful names like Harry the Horse, Benny Southstreet and Rusty Charlie, and you most certainly did not want to mess with them. As Cy Foyer recalled in his memoirs years later, "When Ernie got back to New York, we wasted no time. The mood was on us and we were hot. It couldn't wait. We found the guy who handled the Runyon estate, a theatrical agent named Robbie Lance. Very nice man. He had an office in the 50s on Park Avenue, and we went up there in our cocksure determined way and said we wanted to make a musical out of Guys and Dolls." It was a taste, a feel, a belief about the combination of Damon Runyon and a Broadway musical. About that there was complete certainty. Right, that's it for this episode. Coming up, they may have had a sharp songwriter and composer on board, but who would hit the mark just right to create a book for the show? Was it going to be as easy as finding Frank Loesser, or in the words of Damon Runyon, would it more likely be 6-5 against? I'm Lesley Anne Knight. You can find Just Talking Musicals on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and as a handy podcast as well. Oh yes, and as ever, we'd love it if you press subscribe. There's nothing to pay, but it means you get sent a message when we post a new episode. And coming up, don't miss part 2 of the Guys and Dolls story here on Just Talking Musicals.
Just talking musicals, musicals with you.